It's an uphill battle convincing your fellow politicians to defend limited government. So how many congressmen in Washington are actually getting the message? Congressman Connie Mack joins us with a less than optimistic look. On rare occasions, you hear about members of Congress arguing for shrinking the government. But how many of their colleagues actually listen? Florida Republican Congressman Connie Mack joins us now to talk about how the struggle for limited government looks from inside our big government Congress. Congressman Mack, welcome here. It's a pleasure. How seriously do your colleagues on the Hill take the idea and the value of limited government?
First of all, Judge, thanks for having me on the show, and congratulations to you on this show. I think you'll be a great voice for those of us that are fighting for freedom, and so we're really happy to have you.
You're very gracious. Thank you.
I think that members of Congress are starting to recognize that freedom is the core of all human progress, and that fight for freedom here at home, fighting to defend the freedoms that we have, and not let this big intrusive government continue to destroy freedoms, is important. And I think more and more members are getting that message. Unfortunately, I don't think the majority party understands that message.
All right,
the majority party looks at...
About 2 or 3 months ago, I was interviewing one of your colleagues, Congressman Jim Clyburn, the number 3 ranking Democrat in the House, about health care. And I simply asked him where in the Constitution the federal government is authorized to manage health care. And he said to me, Judge, most of what we do in Washington is not authorized by the Constitution. Is that an attitude prevalent amongst big party types, big government types in both parties?
It's true. It is true that most of what we see happening here in Washington, D.C. is not laid out in the Constitution. So Washington has created its own niche, its own industry, its own business of growing government. Every time people run for office, they run on a platform of they're going to do something more. Instead of, we need to have people running for office that says, we're going to do less. We're going to shrink the size of government. We're going to believe in the individual. We're going to believe in freedom. We're going to allow the individual, the citizens, to make the decisions best for them instead of having government impose decisions on the people. And I was listening to your segment earlier, and I forgot the lady's name, Caroline, I think her name was.
Heldman.
Talking about how businesses, she was saying how businesses need to step up. Well, Judge, what's happening is they can't compete with the federal government because the federal government makes the rules and the federal government spends all the money. So the businesses are having a hard time competing with the government going out there and just spending all of the taxpayer dollars. We need to stop government.
You have never been afraid to go against the grain, Congressman Mack, and you have the salute from almost all the people watching us now. You voted against the Patriot Act because you felt it violated the Fourth Amendment and the First Amendment, even though your district is in Florida. You attacked the Arizona immigration law as unconstitutional because it brings about frontier justice. When you make arguments like that on Capitol Hill, or when you say to your colleagues what I said to Congressman Clyburn, where in the Constitution can we do this? Do they respond, or do they, like Nancy Pelosi, sort of laugh and say, who cares about the Constitution?
You know, I would say that to me, nobody really laughs, but they definitely, you can get marginalized here in Washington pretty quickly. And so if you're one voice or part of a small group of people, it's difficult to get people's attention. But I believe that at the end of the day, the American people are going to speak loud and clear in this next election cycle, and that is they want members of Congress defending their freedoms and their rights as individuals.
Were you surprised last week when the president at the G20, oh so reluctantly, out of one side of his mouth said maybe a little less spending, at the other side of his mouth said you got to spend more, when all the other leaders there, even from the socialist countries in Europe, said we're stopping spending?
It is shocking to me that the President of the United States is the one that is being taught by the leaders in other parts of the world that we need to stop spending. I mean, it should be the President of the United States that understands fiscal responsibility, but instead our President seems to be in a posture of more and more and more spending, which means more government, which means reduced freedoms for us here at home. And the spending hasn't worked. I don't care what people say.
Congressman Mack, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us. One
Thank you.
important lesson I take from the anti-globalization protests at last week's G20 gatherings in Toronto is that people resent the feeling that distant elites are controlling their lives. But we can make a distinction between political control and mere free trade, which can occur globally without micromanagement by the politicians. All the politicians have to do is stay out of the way. Leave us alone. If the protesters realized that and understood how they're playing into the hands of politicians by calling for tariffs on trade and all sorts of environmental and labor regulations on business, they might change the tone of their protests. Their message might actually become global political elites, no. Global trade, yes. America got rich from trade, not from regulation. Here's hoping the whole globe remembers that. Next, a man who is leading the Republican Party in a libertarian direction, and a man who left the Republicans to become a libertarian, former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson and former Georgia Congressman Bob Barr, will be right here.